Buonasera, io sono Giorgio Rutelli, vice direttore della Adnkronos. Siamo qui in diretta dalla Nato Defense College Foundation, che in questo momento sta facendo questo evento, questa importante conferenza sull'Indo-Pacifico. Sono qui con il direttore della Nato Defense College Foundation, Alessandro Minuto-Rizzo, e quindi gli chiedo perché questo evento, quali sono gli obiettivi e qual è fondamentalmente l'idea dietro a questo incontro.
Perché questo evento? Perché l'Indo-Pacifico, nonostante tutto quello che così appare nel dibattito pubblico, è un luogo vitale per gli equilibri mondiali, sia dal punto di vista economico che dal punto di vista strategico. Quindi va benissimo, occuparsi di cose anche più vicine a casa nostra, ma il mondo è interconnesso e quindi l'Indo-Pacifico è importante e soprattutto è importante per i nostri alleati americani. Gli Stati Uniti senza il Pacifico sono, un posto folclorico. Hanno cominciato a diventare una potenza mondiale esattamente allargandosi al Pacifico. E quindi il problema del rapporto Cina, Stati Uniti e adesso anche Russia, che comunque è presente, in modo molto minore nel Pacifico, è una questione politica della massima importanza.
Ecco, oggi qui ci sono ambasciatori appunto della regione, c'è l'ambasciatrice australiana, c'è il rappresentante di Taipei, ci sono figure che vengono da quel quadrante che si incontrano oggi con europei, americani. Qual è quindi l'Italia, qual è il ruolo dell'Italia in questo quadrante? Perché fino a qualche anno fa forse noi davamo per scontato che per noi era importante solo il nostro vicinato, il Mediterraneo allargato, ma effettivamente gli equilibri globali si stanno spostando in quella direzione.
Ma io direi che l'Italia a volte ha delle oscillazioni. Pochi sanno, ma noi abbiamo mandato un ospedale da campo nella guerra di Corea. Pochi ricordano, ma nel 1975 noi abbiamo mandato il Caio Duilio per sostenere, i profughi dal Vietnam, i cosiddetti boat people. L'Afghanistan naturalmente è lontano dal mare, ma sta sull'Oceano Indiano, come paesi importantissimi, rivieraschi. Sono delle oscillazioni. In realtà adesso c'è, la consapevolezza che quello che capita economicamente in quel quadrante riguarda tutti e ha delle ripercussioni abbastanza pesanti. E poi c'è anche la consapevolezza, sottolineata peraltro dal segretario generale della Nato Rutte, che l'Euro-Asia è connessa con l'Indo-Pacifico non fosse altro attraverso il problema russo, ma è veramente il collegamento più evidente, o i nordcoreani che sono arrivati in Ucraina. Ma questo è, la superficie. La sostanza è che se noi non abbiamo un approccio come ce l'ha la Nato a 360 gradi sulla sicurezza, rischiamo di avere dei gol dall'altra metà del campo, e questo sarebbe seccante.
Grazie, allora la seguiremo durante la conferenza e ci sentiamo presto. Grazie Alessandro Minuto-Rizzo. Adesso chiamo a intervenire Paolo Guerrieri, che è un professore di economia, insegna in molti posti, insegna a Sciences Po, ha insegnato in California, conosce sia la realtà europea che quella americana molto bene. Oggi si parla per esempio di IMEC, di corridoi anche economici verso l'Indo-Pacifico per l'Italia, dell'Italia come terminale di una serie di collegamenti. Oggi sono anche dei cavi sottomarini, per esempio, sotto vari profili, sotto il profilo delle connessioni di reti, delle connessioni energetiche, ma anche degli scambi commerciali, ovviamente. L'Italia in questo momento fa bene a guardare anche verso est, visto che verso ovest, si parla molto di dazi, di chiusura, di protezionismo?
Ma fa bene, perché in realtà poi questi rischi che stiamo correndo e che viviamo in Italia e in Europa sono anche i rischi che molti paesi dell'Indo-Pacifico fronteggiano. Sono i rischi di una frammentazione dell'economia mondiale che è sotto i nostri occhi, e soprattutto sono i rischi di un protezionismo che con l'arrivo dell'amministrazione Trump ha subito un'escalation. E naturalmente quello che si teme è che, nonostante che il commercio mondiale ha dimostrato una grande resilienza, perché per ora continua in qualche maniera come dire, avere anche dei record per quanto riguarda le sue dinamiche. Il rischio grosso è che in realtà poi prima o poi questa frammentazione e questo protezionismo colpiscano proprio la possibilità di questi scambi a livello mondiale. Quindi la domanda che ci si pone da noi, ma anche nell'Indo-Pacifico, è che fare? E naturalmente c'è chi risponde alzando le mani, perché dicendo che poi tutto dipenderà dagli Stati Uniti e dalla Cina, se si metteranno d'accordo, se si faranno guerra. E io credo di no. E io credo che proprio incontri come questo di oggi debbano dimostrare che c'è spazio, se si vuole, per una sorta, diciamo, di governance molto particolare, cioè che deve guardare ad accordi più limitati degli accordi globali che si facevano decenni fa, perché quel mondo non c'è più. Accordi tra gruppi di paesi, per esempio Europa e paesi dell'Indo-Pacifico, che quindi possano in qualche maniera consentire che per quella parte anche grande, perché noi non dimentichiamolo, l'80% del commercio mondiale non è sotto il controllo degli Stati Uniti, a questo punto questa parte si organizzi per dar luogo a queste forme di, come dire, regolazione flessibile, pragmatica, molto mirata. A me piace chiamarla un governo a geometria variabile, cioè che si adatti molto ai temi e ai luoghi. Questa diciamo, possibilità esiste perché abbiamo noi in Europa e molti paesi dell'Indo-Pacifico, il Giappone, la Corea del Sud, abbiamo gli stessi interessi a preservare un mondo che possa consentire questi scambi. Ecco, questo è l'interesse per l'Italia e per l'Europa a guardare a quest'area che appunto poi non è lontana, ma in qualche modo è iperconnessa in termini economici.
Ecco, lei ha scritto un libro che si chiama Europa Sovrana, l'ha scritto insieme a Piercarlo Padoan e secondo lei quello che ha visto in queste ultime settimane, in particolare anche ovviamente con le elezioni tedesche, con la Germania che di nuovo avrà un governo un po' più solido, un po' più stabile, quello che è successo a Londra 2 giorni fa, anzi ieri, e quello che insomma c'è stato nelle ultime settimane ci fa capire che c'è sicuramente una spinta per l'Europa, diciamo, a ripensare anche il proprio ruolo nel mondo, anche allargata magari al Regno Unito, e secondo lei ci sono le condizioni? Per ora si parla di difesa, si parla di sicurezza, ma sotto il profilo economico c'è anche lì una possibilità di di una centralizzazione, di un controllo maggiore da parte di Bruxelles delle dinamiche globali, o c'è il rischio che poi gli Stati membri davanti alle le guerre commerciali eccetera vadano da soli? Perché una cosa che non si dice molto è che comunque la politica commerciale oggi la fa l'Unione Europea, mentre oggi si parla metti i dazi all'Italia ma non al Belgio. In realtà si possono scegliere magari le categorie merceologiche, si possono scegliere le merci su cui mettere i dazi o meno, ma poi una volta che viene colpita l'Unione Europea viene colpita in quanto tale.
Sì, le pressioni come dire, che vengono dall'esterno sono enormi, a questo punto sono molto aumentate rispetto a semplicemente all'anno scorso, quindi a qualche mese fa. Allo stesso tempo è aumentato anche l'incentivo per i Paesi membri dell'Unione Europea a muoversi insieme. Lei giustamente ricorda che per esempio in campo commerciale, che insieme alla difesa, non dimentichiamolo, sarà l'area dove più poi l'Unione Europea, i Paesi europei saranno chiamati in qualche modo a dare risposte, in questo campo la sovranità dell'Europa già c'è, perché la Commissione in qualche modo negozia a nome di tutti. Allora si tratta, secondo me, qui di rafforzare quello che si capisce già possa essere una risposta in chiave di attore europeo. Innanzitutto, naturalmente, si tratterà di negoziare con l'amministrazione Trump e con Trump, perché è chiaro che noi non vorremmo una guerra commerciale, ma non vogliamo neanche subire dei dazi. Quindi lì si tratterà di avere un approccio transattivo. Però noi dobbiamo poi, e questo dell'Indo-Pacifico ce lo ricorda, sviluppare quell'enorme rete di rapporti che abbiamo con tutte le aree del mondo. 50 e più paesi ne fanno parte, l'America Latina, diciamo appunto l'Asia e l'Asia del Pacifico. A questo punto, quindi, questa è una seconda grande area dove trovare delle forme in qualche modo di rafforzamento del ruolo dell'Europa. Terzo, non dimentichiamolo, ce lo ha ricordato proprio qualche tempo fa Mario Draghi sul Financial Times, abbiamo all'interno del mercato interno europeo dei dazi da rimuovere il più rapidamente possibile, quelle che impediscono gli scambi addirittura tra i paesi europei. Questo è un campo enorme di potenzialità, quindi qui ci sono tre direzioni, diciamo, quello che può essere un negoziato con gli Stati Uniti di Trump, espandere questo network internazionale globale e rimuovere e rilanciare il mercato interno, che possono offrire all'Europa, come dire, sia un rafforzamento economico, ma sia anche un ruolo geopolitico nuovo. Naturalmente, come lei diceva, l'unità e evitare le divisioni è fondamentale, quindi questo sarà fondamentalmente il problema da affrontare e da subito.
Grazie a Paolo Guerrieri. Adesso do la linea alla regia perché sta iniziando la diretta e la conferenza della Nato Defense College Foundation. Grazie.
Guidelines for the future. We see realities changing before our eyes at an unprecedented speed, and events unfolding before the books and even the commentators trying to explain them. We have to embrace change for good reasons, and challenges don't go alone because we still believe that they are accompanied by opportunities. This is why we think that it is important to understand and analyze in the best possible way situations that seem particularly intricate. And I think we all understand what we're talking about. The Foundation is today addressing the Indo-Pacific issue for the third time, and at each passage we wish to make another step in better understanding the issues, discussing them from different angles in a serious, scientific and informed conversation. We convinced to carry it out a spirit of measure and respect, and persuaded that dialogue and prevention is fundamental. This is why the Foundation embraces cooperative security, the third core task of NATO, as a few of you may know. It means building partnerships based on mutual respect, a two-way street with the primary objective to project stability, based on dialogue, consultation, and practical cooperation. It aims at upholding the rules-based international order. The Indo-Pacific is very important in many ways, and developments in this vast region can directly affect the Euro-Atlantic, as already Secretary General Rutte remembered several times. In today's world, we are all interconnected, another motivation for shaping a better understanding to the benefit of all. We look forward now, today, this afternoon, to an interesting exchange and have divided the conversation in two panels. NATO is not a primary actor, of course, but it is looking at 360 degrees security approach and remains a relevant security provider. We acknowledge the partnerships that was established with Australia, Japan, New Zealand and South Korea, four very relevant and important actors in many ways. Strategic approach and coordination with them are going to be very helpful to ensure regional stability. A cooperative security framework helps to avoid dangerous escalations, building shared confidence and common projects. Training and education are part of that, and the college in Rome has a natural role to play. So we are opening a new book and its first chapter. The second panel looks at geoeconomics and cooperation, at the promotion of tools of soft security in a diversified environment, where there is an interplay between diplomacy and economics. Supporting trade and technology and promoting exchanges is in the general interest, resisting at the same time to cyber threats and hybrid measures. Secure trade routes, stable supply chains, resilient infrastructures are also factors that contribute very much to stability. I wish to thank the speaker moderators who have accepted our invitation today here in Rome. They are the best specialists available, and on the issues to be discussed, they offer a game of expertise. I thank Ambassador of Taiwan, Tsai, for his contribution, Ambassador Cowley, for the concluding remarks she promised to make, il Circolo degli Esteri, where we are, for their hospitality, and on a personal note, the best wishes to the new president-elect, Maria Sultacili. We wish the best for you. Congratulazioni. Special thanks go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy. I see it, Ken Kitatani here, the Compagnia di San Paolo, for this support on this project. And last but not least, my thanks to our media partners and of course to the entire staff of this foundation for their hard work and their enthusiasm. And I thank you for the attention. Thank you very much. We can start with you.
Hey, good evening.
You can introduce yourself by yourself.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you, Nato Defense College Foundation, for having us. It's an honor and a pleasure. My name is Amaya Sanchez, and I'm Senior Fellow working on India, actually, in the Asia program at Institut Montaigne in Paris. Also Associate Fellow at the LSE Ideas. So I'm joined today by a stellar panel, I have to say. Before going into each one's introduction, perhaps, if I may, just to frame the discussion, I'll just sort of note who's at the table with me to begin with. To my right is Dr. Luis Simon. He's Director of the Center for Security Diplomacy and Strategy, CSDS, at VUB Brussels, Director of the Brussels office at Ghana Royal Institute. I will give more detailed bio in a minute of each one as they speak. Further to my right is Councillor Andrea Ramusi. He's a career diplomat at the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and currently head of the Office for NATO Security Strategic Issues and Political Military Affairs since September 2023 till today. To my left is Gabriele Abondanza. He's an international relations and international security scholar, also Marie Curie Fellow at the University of Madrid, Complutense, Associate Researcher at the University of Sydney in Australia, as well as Associate Fellow at Istituto Affari Internazionali here in Italy. And further to my left, we have Pietro De Matteis, who is currently responsible for public diplomacy engagements with the Indo-Pacific at NATO. So it's great to have someone in-house as well. Okay, so without further ado, I'll just sort of frame our discussion somewhat, even though we've already had some opening remarks, which were very much on point. So really our panel is about cooperative security, this being, as was mentioned already, one of the core tasks of NATO. And the focus really is about soft security, meaning political dialogue, also a practical means of engagement, and specifically in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, as already mentioned too, there's 4 partners that NATO is more actively engaging with, IP4. Those are Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia. There's also an informal NATO Plus you may know of, which includes Israel, India, which is, as I mentioned, my region of expertise is far from becoming that. But what's interesting, I think, right now is, on the one hand, the extremely convoluted geopolitical scenario we're facing, unprecedented EU-Atlantic rift. We're mentioning all of this today later. Of course, the strategic relationship between Russia and PRC, China, but also the unprecedented threats we're currently facing when it comes to not just the Indo-Pacific generally. For example, I wanted to mention critical and disruptive technologies, protecting energy security. There's the usual terrorism. There's also cyber defense. There's counter-piracy. And of course, nuclear non-proliferation. There's also actual threats from the region. Of course, China's potential aggression in Taiwan is ranked top in the list, together with the Korean Peninsula, but not only. It's also about instability in the Western Pacific, for example, and it's also about, coming from a sort of more Indian Ocean perspective, the threat of China's presence in the region, also geoeconomically speaking, right? And in terms of critical infrastructure. So it's not just the usuals that we discuss. Okay, I'll stop here because I would really much like the speakers to speak. We're going to start off with Chancellor Andrea Romussi, if I may introduce you properly now. As I said, he's currently working at the NATO office, the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But Chancellor Romussi has a long experience in different postings involved in security and defense, including as senior civilian representative for NATO ISAF mission in Western Afghanistan, as Counselor Adjoint supporting the UN Special Coordinator's Office in Lebanon, as well as First Counselor at Italy's mission to the UN in New York. More recently, he was appointed Italy's ambassador to Burkina Faso prior to joining his current position. And Chancellor Romussi is going to sort of take a broader perspective to begin with on how to increase the alliance's consensus on a common strategic vision, taking into account the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amaya. Much appreciated. I would take the standing over there to deliver my remarks. First of all, I would like to thank Ambassador Minuto-Rizzo, the Nato Defense College, and his team for organizing this roundtable. Appreciation goes also to the Circolo for having us here today. Delving on the issue that we discussed today is of increasing importance nowadays. Over the recent years, we have seen the link between the security of the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific regions growing ever more, with the war of in Ukraine being a catalyst. As stated in Washington at the last NATO summit, China has been a decisive enabler of Russia's war, while North Korea's participation in the hostilities has shown how this growing interrelationship between the theaters can assume a military form. At the same time, the Indo-Pacific itself remains a potential flashpoint for global instability, given its strategic importance for maritime routes and due to the many challenges arriving from that region. We are particularly concerned about the global impact that tensions in the region might have, especially in terms of disruption of sea trade, global supply chains, and the broader consequences on international stability. What needs to be avoided is to message a supposed collective West distraction, which our competitors might want to leverage to pursue incremental gains in the Indo-Pacific region. For this reason, we deem it essential to maintain an effective coordination among the allies and partners, with a view to sending unequivocal messages of condemnation and readiness to deal with any unilateral attempt to change the status quo by force or coercion. Against this backdrop, only a comprehensive and coordinated approach would offer the opportunity to effectively address the multiple challenges affecting the region's stability and avoid further possible spillover effects to the Euro-Atlantic and global security. I believe that the results achieved at the last summit were of great importance to consolidate our dialogue with regional partners and set forth a positive agenda on shared security interests that can enhance our ability to tackle common threats and challenges. We have agreed on a number of flagship projects to strengthen our practical cooperation in the support to Ukraine, as well as in the field of cyber defense, countering disinformation, and technology. In this regard, we have achieved considerable progress in our engagements and held joint activities in all the sectors that I have just mentioned. Such initiatives are of great importance to live up to the challenges that the Alliance and its partners face, such as maintaining the technological edge over their competitors. In addition to this, our political dialogue with partners in the Indo-Pacific has equally gone. Our exchanges covered issues like the likes of arms control, disarmament and non-proliferation, counter-terrorism, maritime security, and the climate change security nexus. All of this contributes to the development of a shared understanding of the security landscape in which we have to operate. Sharing information and best practices is key to create framework to coordinate our responses and shape a common strategic vision. Further opportunity to cement our partnership take place through bilateral initiatives too. Italy has been present in the Indo-Pacific regularly over the past years, thanks to the campaigns of its Navy and Air Force. There is thus a coordinated aero-naval presence of European organizations and increased engagement with our regional partners and organizations. So these are the formal remarks I delivered, but I want also to stress other facts. In the wide spectrum of partnership that NATO holds around the world, the IP4 are the most advanced country, and the partnership is mutually beneficial in the sense that they are not only demander of technology assistance, but we are basically playing on an equal footing with the four countries, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. They belong also to other formats, some of them. I mentioned here the AUKUS, in which, for instance, Italy is developing an interest for the technology sharing that it might open up to. So these are important, and not only for the high level of cooperation we can develop, but also because we share the same values and principles. This is very important, especially nowadays where we see that the alliance is somehow under duress, under having difficult times, whereby we think it is important to cement the alliance glue and to go back to the original purpose of NATO. So developing further this relationship, I think it goes in the right direction with the IP4, and we understand that it is required of us to make this effort, but Italy has already been participating in exercise and several other naval campaign, diplomacy campaign in the region. It's an interest multifaceted. It's not only about security, it's also about naval diplomacy, but it is important to see in the coming months and years the way we will be able also to keep on performing this exercise and this partnership. I think it is vital, but the extent to which we will be able to go, it will depend also on the scenario in the European continent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Ramusi. You were actually ahead of time, which is very unusual. So thanks a lot for that. We now have Dr. Luis Simon. I'm going to introduce him properly as well. As I mentioned, he's Director for the Center for Security Diplomacy and Strategy, VUB, also Director for the Brussels office of Elcano Royal Institute. He's also Senior Associate, non-resident of CSIS in Washington, D.C., as well as visiting fellow at the Robert Schuman Institute for Advanced Studies at EU Institute. Luis is currently leading a European Research Council consolidated project on US-China rivalry and its implications for Europe. His areas of expertise include international security, US foreign and defense policy, European security, transatlantic relations, as well as Asian security, and he's well published in a number of these topics. Now, again, against the extremely volatile situation we're facing, particularly when it comes to the Euro-Atlantic rift, Ukraine scenario with unpredictable sort of rapprochement between Russia and the US. How would you consider, what are the sort of new emerging paradigms, would you say, on China in terms of how should NATO engage, and perhaps you can unpack this among these different sort of new alliances and partnerships that are coming up? Thank you.
Thanks, Amaya. I think that was a quite long introduction of my bio. It sounds like you're introducing a very important person. And I think you used up all of the extra time that I was planning to use from, sorry, I didn't realize when I sent the bio. But thanks for the intro, and thanks, Ambassador, Director, for the invitation. And for the questions. I'm just going to follow up on some of the stuff that Andrea was mentioning. He anticipated a lot of my points. I think if we try to look at the war in Ukraine, which of course is very much in our minds these days, through a broader sort of systemic lens, I would say that at least up until 2 weeks ago, which is when everything sort of came crashing, one of the key takeaways from the war is that it sort of animated the consolidation of, and this is Biden administration language, 2 sets of adversarial geopolitical alignments, however loose, however fragile or imperfect they might be. On the one hand, you would have this sort of continental pan-Eurasian alignment of authoritarian powers structured around the Sino-Russian partnership, but also including North Korea and Iran. And I don't need to dwell on the various ways in which China, DPRK, and Iran have enabled Russia's war machine and defense industrial operation, both directly and indirectly. Andrea already touched on that. And then on the other hand, you have this sort of greater alignment between US allies in the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic. And we've seen Japan, Australia, ROK come forward in support of Ukraine, but also strengthen its ties with NATO, right? However, it seems that the current US administration is questioning or even challenging the notion of this notion of adversarial geopolitical alignments, right? And I think this, if confirmed, this could be a big deal, both because the US is the center of gravity of one of these 2 alignments, but also because it's the US government, to be more precise, the previous administration, who's actually advanced this frame or narrative of adversarial geopolitical alignments, right? And ever since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, there's been a rather intense debate in the United States about going back to China, about the opportunity costs of engaging, of supporting versus not supporting Ukraine, and more concretely about how US engagement or non-engagement in Ukraine impinges on the balance of power between the United States and China, right? So looking at Ukraine through a China lens, right? And many experts sort of looked at Ukraine and China as a zero-sum game, right? And they were telling us in terms of trade-offs, and they were telling us that every dollar that the United States spends in supporting Ukraine is a dollar it cannot use to counter China, to reinforce the US military position vis-a-vis China in the Pacific, which should be the priority, right? And I think this seems to be the priority, this seems to be the perspective of, in the second Trump administration, Secretary of Defense Hegseth told us as much at NATO headquarters in Brussels 2 weeks ago. He said that the need to beef up its military position in the Indo-Pacific unavoidably compels the US to downsize its engagement in Europe. And I think that clashes with the logic laid out by the Biden administration, who insisted that supporting Ukraine would generate payoffs or synergies vis-a-vis China. According to the Biden administration and to many of the US Indo-Pacific allies, by standing up for global norms whenever and wherever they are challenged, the US and the international community would send a powerful deterring, if you will, signal to China that would lead Beijing to think twice before making any sort of revisionist move territorially, right? So I think we can safely say that the Biden and Trump 2 administrations feature different perspectives on how the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic regions interface, in the sense that Biden underscored the importance of global norms, treated China and Russia as a more or less coherent bloc, and prioritized cross-regional cooperation between US allies in the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic. And Trump could very well be challenging every single one of those propositions. He's emphasized the need to establish a clear ranking of priorities. China comes first, and to be more precise, the China challenge in the Indo-Pacific comes first, everything else is secondary or even superfluous, it could be. He seems to be rejecting the logic of treating China and Russia as a coherent bloc, and could even be trying to look for wedges and to create divisions between the two. There's a debate on that, happy to talk more about that later. And then he doesn't seem to be, this is not confirmed, but he doesn't seem to be as interested or invested as Biden in fostering cooperation between U.S. allies in both regions. He prefers to deal with allies bilaterally, right? Not even within the same region, right? So having said that, I think insofar as Trump's approach towards Ukraine and Europe appears to be partly or even largely informed by calculations relating to China and the Indo-Pacific, then I think we can say that there is a very important thing that the Trump 2 and Biden administrations share or have in common, meaning that both recognize the logic of a high degree of interdependence between the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific region. So that broader principle stands, and this is a big deal in the sense that it sends us the message that whatever happens in Europe, whatever boils in Europe, often cooks outside of Europe, and more often than not the Indo-Pacific, and that sort of relates to the plea for Europeans to at least have eyes and ears and get a sense of what's happening, what's cooking in the Indo-Pacific. And I think at the heart of this picture lie a series of questions around the nature and scale of the Chinese challenge to US power, some of which I would say are reminiscent of all Cold War debates about the nature and scale of the Soviet threat and how to counter it. And namely, and I think I would highlight a few questions, should China be seen as a regional, i.e. Indo-Pacific, Indo-Pacific-centric or Indo-Pacific only threat, or a global one from a US perspective? How much effort should the United States devote to countering China in the Indo-Pacific versus countering China elsewhere, outside of the Indo-Pacific? How important is it to counter Chinese presence or Chinese influence in Europe vis-a-vis countering Chinese presence or Chinese influence in other regions? How much effort should the United States devote to countering a low-cost Chinese effort to create instability in Europe, in regions like Europe or the Middle East? And then, of course, last but not least, what is the level of coordination between China and Russia, and to what extent, if at all, can that relationship be, I wouldn't say manipulated, but influenced, right? I think those are the key points, and which are sort of very much guiding foreign policy debates right now. Thanks.
Hey, thank you. That was a lot. Food for thought. Thanks a lot.
Still some time.
Yeah, still 30 seconds left. Well done. It definitely gave us an excellent sort of framing, right, of, as you say, key geopolitical debates and broader picture, which is very much needed, also in terms of trade-offs, as you mentioned, and U.S. administration's priorities at the moment. So let me move on to Dr. Gabriele Amandanza, sitting to my left. As I mentioned, he's an IR scholar, an international security scholar as well, currently based in Universidad Complutense in Madrid. After many years of working on the Indo-Pacific in Australia, he is now cooperating with a number of universities. I mentioned before University of Sydney, as well as IAI here in Italy, think tank. And he actually mentions to be the first scholar to bring the concept of the Indo-Pacific, I assume, right, to Italy's academic circles. Which
Someone had to do it.
Quite a feat. He currently works alongside academics, policymakers, diplomats, and a number of officers to actually try and do what we're doing today, which is foster cooperation between the many actors in the Indo-Pacific. So having this extremely sort of broad view of the region, having lived in the region, which is also extremely important for a long time, could you perhaps focus now, zoom in more on the interplay between the US, which we've mentioned sort of from the broader perspective, but also in terms of IP4, the Pacific partners, and the EU, and what are the implications for NATO? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this lovely introduction. Thanks to our president and directors for the invitations, and thank you all for being here. Now, being both a European and an Australian, I'll try to give you some insights into these very, very broad topics. So the IP4, Europe and the United States, I mean, we could be talking for hours about this, so I'll try to be quick. We live today in a multipolar world, which may be a more democratic context compared to, say, 50 years ago, but that also makes it more volatile. And hence, cooperative security is more difficult to achieve as a goal. Now, the IP4, they are a particular grouping because they are a minilateral within a military alliance, which goes to show just how much there is an alignment between the IP4 and the fully fledged NATO members. This is extremely important because we know that what happens geoeconomically and geopolitically in the Indo-Pacific impacts on Euro-Atlantic security nowadays in a direct way. So the importance of the IP4 is more relevant today than ever. Australia, beginning with the IP4, it's a very committed actor in the region. It's possibly, arguably, the staunchest and steadiest US ally since World War II. It's a country that cooperates with NATO in a variety of ways in the Middle East, but also in the region itself. So given Australia's posture, we can expect more cooperation with NATO, even in terms of maritime security, but we also know how important US approval for such developments is in Australia. We then get to Japan, another very steady Indo-Pacific player. We know that the very concept, the very modern iteration of the concept of the Indo-Pacific was born in Japan, in Tokyo in 2007. And despite the country's traditional foreign policy limitations, Article 9, low defense spending, the country is increasingly threat aware, and for very good reason, of course. So if you look at the tailored partnership between Japan and NATO, we can see that the field of opportunities for bilateral cooperation is broadening. This brings us to South Korea, a particular country in this case, because as we know, up until not that long ago, strategic ambiguity was a word, was an expression that was widely utilized when referring to Seoul's foreign policy. And this was perfectly understandable. The security trade divide lived by countries in the region is huge, and South Korea is no exception. Still, the country is a major defense player, and given these capabilities and its renewed awareness of security threats in the region, this could be one of the many reasons that will lead to cooperate more with NATO. Fourth, we have New Zealand. New Zealand is a different country altogether in this case. New Zealand is a country that has a lower threat perception also, not only, but also for geographical reasons. Its focus on non-traditional security issues somewhat marks it as the odd man out, the IP4 grouping. Still, New Zealand has successfully implemented passing exercises in the Pacific region more than once in the past few years, and it has also cooperated with NATO on a variety of non-traditional security issues, especially in the South Pacific. So under these very specific circumstances, we can expect more cooperation with the alliance as well. On the other side of the pond, there's Europe. Europe, which, as we know, joined these debates late for a variety of reasons. I've only got 4 minutes, so I cannot really tell you why, but you all know this better than me. The good news is that Europe is finally pivoting to the Indo-Pacific, and that also meant and means cooperating with NATO, not just in the Indian Ocean as in the past. Everything began with France, the country that spearheaded the European Indo-Pacific approach through a very effective combination of hard and soft power, not only capabilities, but policies as well. The United Kingdom, on the other hand, is a country that prioritizes hard power and more traditional containment policies in the region, aligning very well, of course, with the United States. Germany and the Netherlands, two major trading nations, countries that have sought to approach the region in a more moderate way, in a more rational way, some would argue, and this could be seen in their Indo-Pacific guidelines. Berlin, in particular, suffers from an excessive reliance on the lucrative Chinese market, but they are trying to address that as well. And that brings us to Italy, our own host country, which is a peculiar country in this case because, on the one hand, it's a country that has very deep economic, normative, and even strategic engagements in the region. On the other, it's a country without a specific Indo-Pacific strategy. And some of you may remember this. I've been banging on this quite a while and quite a lot in Italy. other countries are joining this debate as well. So all of this bodes well for the cooperation between Europe, NATO, and the Indo-Pacific, but we need to be realistic. The international security scenario is more volatile than ever. It's deteriorating more quickly than we thought, and so Europe needs to decide whether it wants to become a master of its own destiny or not. To do that, there are no easy fixes, clearly. Higher defense spending is just one of the many solutions. More rational defense spending. We have a highly fragmented defense industry in Europe. That did work in the 20th century, not very well, but it did work, strategically speaking. It will not work in the 21st century. And perhaps even the creation of a security-oriented minilateral of European nations. These are extremely ambitious policies, of course, but these are very difficult times, and so they call for ambitious responses. Last but not least, surely not least, we have the United States, which is the initiator of the global liberal order, which we enjoy, most of us enjoy. In the Euro-Atlantic area, it's at the head of NATO. In the Indo-Pacific, it's at the head of the hub-and-spoke system. This is the very system that guaranteed US primacy for more than 70 years. Now it may be challenged both internally because of the destabilizing effects of the second Trump administration, and externally because of Chinese and Russian revisionism. So what needs to be remembered and highlighted is that this is likely to be not a permanent turn in US foreign policy. Yet, despite all of this, the US's allies and partners really need to do more than before, need to do better than before, and need to do all of this by themselves. This is difficult because we live in times in which the words and even the acronym NATO and ATO in the Indo-Pacific might be something that raises wariness in the region. And yet we need to do that as well. So there are some positive developments, the Draghi and Letta reports for the EU, the responses of Ursula von der Leyen and the Commission to those reports, the very recent remarks of Mark Rutte, which of course deal with what's been happening in the past few weeks. But only time will tell if these positive developments will bring about actual foreign policy shifts or not. As my colleagues already said, we could be talking about this for ages. So for now, I'll just thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the Q&A later on. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. On time as well. Well done. Thanks a lot, Gabriele, for that very sort of comprehensive overview of the many different actors, including the IP4, EU, and the US. So now we're going to zoom out again somewhat. I have Pietro de Matesio to my left, and again, let me introduce him as he deserves. He's, as I mentioned already, he's currently working for NATO, responsible for public diplomacy, having worked for 14 years for the EU in various positions in Brussels, North America, the Middle East, and Asia, which I'm sure is very convenient at this point in time. He has a PhD from the University of Cambridge and has researched at Columbia University in New York and Renmin University in Beijing, with a focus on energy, environment, and climate change diplomacy. So again, as I mentioned, could we perhaps, so we've gone quite a bit into detail, could we again sort of zoom out and think against the current backdrop, having mentioned the sort of very decisive moment we seem to be in, how could NATO really shape its narrative in the Indo-Pacific region to sort of make it more coherent and cohesive and productive, really? Thank you very much, Maya. Thank you very much, Ambassador, Director Politi. Thank you very much for being here. If you allow me, actually, I'll make a step back first, because I think it requires a bit of reflection. If you look at NATO, established in 1949, if you look at the UN, established in 1945, the World Bank, 1944, the General Agreements on Tariff and Trade that led to the World Trade Organization, these are organizations which have been established on the ashes of the World War II. So we know what happens when international rule-based order is not upheld, and actually that's why we have developed these institutions. NATO, as a political military organization, which was established in 1949, exactly aimed at ensuring peace and stability in the transatlantic space.
And actually, we did that by ensuring that our allies would be strong enough to avoid and deter any possible attacks on our allies, and ensuring that an attack on one ally would be an attack to all of us. Very basic principle, Article 5. I worked for the EU, as you mentioned, 14 years. I studied all the treaties of the European Union, like this big. The NATO treaty, I invite you all to read it. It's only a couple of pages, but actually enshrines so much this progressive approach that we have really learned from after the Second World War. Very much anchored on the UN Charter, respecting the principle of rule of law and democracy and freedom. So I think it's very important to frame this conversation, what we stand for today, what NATO stands for. Of course, NATO has changed. The challenges that we face today have changed a lot over the past 75 years. Actually, last year we celebrated the 75th anniversary of NATO. The world has changed. Back then, the challenges were very, very much geographically located, very specific. Think of our domains, air, land, and sea. That's the domain where we would ensure deterrence. Now, we have space, clearly not specifically geographically located. We have the cyberspace. We have cyber attacks, millions of cyber attacks against our country on a daily basis. We have information space, the cognitive space, even though not specifically domain for NATO, but it's a space, the information space, where we are, as democracies, affected and attacked by Russia, and not only on a daily basis. Right, so the world has changed, NATO has changed. We have a strategic concept since 2022, after the Madrid summit, that actually updated the way we tackle these challenges. But clearly one key element is that the challenges we face are global, and that's why cooperative security, and was mentioned before by colleagues, it's so important. If challenges are global, we cannot deal them alone. Even though we have a good cooperation at regional level, transatlantic space, it's not enough. So if you want to deal with cyber space, hybrid threats, think of undersea cables connecting the world, communication infrastructure, space. We need to cooperate. And that's why the approach of cooperative security is so important, and that's why we've developed some 35 partnerships with countries across the globe. We have Colombia, we have the IP4, specifically beyond our geographical scope. We have the partners in European space and not allied countries, the Partnership for Peace. We have Mediterranean Dialogue. So we have partners across the globe, but the partners we have in the IP4, which, by the way, is not a formal grouping, the partners we have in the IP4, Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, they are special. Special because we share the same principle, the same values of democracy, respect of the rule-based international order as nobody else. These are the countries that stepped together with us when Russia invaded Ukraine, sanctions, increased cooperation. So that's why these partners are so important. Historically, these partners, cooperation is not new. They've been working with us for decades. Think of the cooperation in the Western Balkans. Think of Afghanistan. This cooperation is long-lasting, but actually even predates, if you think, even NATO. Think of the 70,000 Australia and New Zealand soldiers who died to protect freedom and democracy on our continent. So this cooperation is much more rooted than we usually think. So if Russia or China says that we are expanding to the region, that's not true. The cooperation is rooted on the principles of democracy that we really share. And of course, there are also other aspects. We need to be at the highest level of technology to be able to deter our adversary. And only by cooperating with those countries that are actually at that level of technology, think of Japan and Korea, we can be at the highest level of technology to deter our enemies. Even though in the cyber and hybrid space, there's lots of happening, so we should do maybe more there. And of course, the cooperation needs to be reinforced, and that's why over the past several years, we have reinforced the cooperation, especially after Russian aggression of Ukraine. Clearly, this marked a key point for the evolution of our relationship. We know already economically we are connected, I mentioned historically, politically, economically, 1/5 of the economy goes through the choke points in the Indo-Pacific. 2/3 of the semiconductors come from the region, and Taiwan specifically. But now, when we have a no-limits friendship between Russia and China, when we have a mutual defense cooperation between North Korea and Russia, with troops from North Korea coming on the front line and missiles being used against Europeans in Ukraine, clearly this adds a very strong dynamics of security which connects the two regions even more. And of course, our friends in the Pacific also are worried that what is North Korea getting out of all the support that North Korea is giving to Russia? Is it technological support? Is maybe ballistic support and technology that can then further put in danger the stability of the Indo-Pacific? So once more, an element of makes us worried about the situation there. Now, the new concept, 2022 concept of NATO doesn't consider China as a threat. So that's very important. China is a challenger. But even before the Russian aggression, we know that China is problematic for several reasons. There's a significant build-up of the military capacity of China with no transparency. That's problematic because we don't know.
Hi, so we are back here at the Nato Defense College Foundations. I'm Giorgio Rutelli, and we have here with us Ambassador Vincent Tsai. He's the representative for Taiwan in Italy, in Rome, and welcome. Thank you for being with us. So I wanted to ask you, Italy and Taiwan have a strong relationship. We have a very strong economic relationship that goes also beyond semiconductors, because we do know that semiconductors is, one of the main one of the main strengths of Taiwan. But what is, how is going Italian and Taiwan relationship right now? And what are the areas in which it can grow?
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have been maintaining very close relationship between Taiwan and Italy. And I also believe our relationship can even be closer in the future. And right now, between two countries, we focus very much on political cooperation, economic cooperation, and technological cooperation. I would like to emphasize very much on the economic cooperation between two countries. And Italy became the number 3 biggest trading country for Taiwan in Europe. Every year, we have more than 5 to 6 billion total trade between two countries. And right now, we would like to bring more Taiwanese businessmen to do investment in Italy. And in 2024, we have 700 million investment from Taiwan directly to Italy, focus very much on the semiconductor, electric car, energy, and also hotel business. So we will continue to do that because we feel very confident for the market here. We believe the businessmen from Taiwan, they can make big money in this market. And of course, apart from economic cooperation, right now, between two countries, we would like to put together for the technological cooperation. I would like to point out several industry we can work together. Of course, semiconductor industry, we already achieved some good record on that. Apart from that, we also would like to emphasize the artificial intelligence and also electric car. I believe these two areas, we can continue to create a benefit for two countries. So technological cooperation is another shining spot between bilateral cooperation. And of course, the most important thing, political cooperation. I thank you very much for the strong support from Italian government in 2024 hosting G7 meeting and show very strong support for Taiwan and also for the Indo-Pacific region. I believe this kind of tone will continue to be echoed by the follow-up country, which will be Canada, going to host G7 in this year. So we thank you very much, Italian government's long-standing support. And we also happy to see that Italian government send their naval vessel to Indo-Pacific region and to join the training exercise and all the exchange in that area. And we would like to work together with the other regional partners, also including European countries, to uphold the peace and stability in Indo-Pacific region.
Yes, this seminar is about soft security, but we can also talk about hard security. What is happening right now in the seas around Taiwan is preoccupying many international observers. Do you think that Taiwan security is at risk right now, or do you think that NATO and European allies and the American allies will, continue supporting Taiwan's, claim for security and stability?
Okay, we see many things changing day by day in Indo-Pacific region, but one thing never changed: China's coercion and pressure on Taiwan. This thing never changed. From China, every day sending their aircraft and naval vessel to and near Taiwan. So I think we continue to receive this kind of threat from China. Right now, I think we made our policy very clearly. First, we would like to maintain peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. Secondly, we would like to have a normal dialogue with PRC under the mutual respect and equality. And we also would like to work with the other democratic country, including Italy and the United States and the other country in the region, to put our effort to maintain the peace in that region. Of course, we see the growing participation from the international community in Indo-Pacific region, especially from the G7 country, also from the Europe and the other Indo-Pacific country, including Japan, Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. So I would like to emphasize that we work together with those countries on the same direction. Only one purpose and only one objective. We would like to maintain peace in the region.
Thank you. Thank you to Vincent Tsai. And I will now go, we will now go back to the live streaming of the conference from the Nato Defense College Foundation.
Real meeting on defense ministers in November that actually wants to support cooperation on defense industry.
Okay, thank you for that, Pietro. I wanted to move over to Councillor Ramusi, but in fact this question is to both of you in different ways. You mentioned, Councillor, the idea of, I believe, Ukraine as a collective West destruction. Is that correct? So I'm intrigued by this, particularly in the current context, right? Because you, as I understood your argument, Luis, you were saying that it's, for the US, precisely what it's trying to do is sort of shift very much the attention towards the Indo-Pacific, but hence China, it's indecisive as to whether China is a global or a sort of only regional threat. So can you elaborate more on how this so-called collective West distraction you think could play out with regards to the Indo-Pacific specifically and against the current rift, but also in terms of NATO's role in the region? And perhaps, Luis, your own perspective on this idea of the collective West destruction?
Yes, thank you. I think it is important to keep the momentum high and to build on that momentum so as to avoid distraction. I want to reference here to another link because typically we have this focus when we talk about the Indo-Pacific as a region, but actually we are talking also about the players. The players are especially China. And what is happening today, there is a new link basically between the dynamic in the Indo-Pacific and the Arctic wave, which goes all the way around to the North Atlantic. And it is not by chance that we think President Trump spoke about Greenland, about rare earth, about militarizing the island and making it part of the game. Because today, for the first time since the Second World War, basically, since when NATO was established, we can see the safety of navigation in the Atlantic at stake. because with the opening up of the melting of the ice and the opening up to the new routes, we already know that China proclaimed itself a near Arctic state and is teaming up with Russia in that area. So we think that the navigation, freedom of navigation and the security of the Atlantic is at stake, and that was something that never happened before. So I think there is a strong link also in the dynamics in the Indo-Pacific on the route north. So this brings us also to some risk of regionalization of NATO, whereby you have the major player, the US, building up strong ties with northern countries to secure the Arctic, to close up that way, which opens up now. And we already elaborated on the diminishing interest in the security of the continental Europe from the US. It is something which is unfolding ahead of us. And, these are dynamics that are not in line with the spirit of the alliance, whereby solidarity should be at 360 degrees, but priorities are taking shape and new priorities are being shaped. So I think this is an important aspect to point out. So distraction means that you pay less attention to some quadrant than the others, but to some extent it's difficult to avoid given the amount of capabilities that you can deploy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Please,
sure. I mean, I don't know if I would, use the word distraction, at least as far as Europe is concerned. I think the future of the European security architecture hinges on what happens in Ukraine right now. Having said that, I think the argument coming from the US that the United States will want to prioritize, this is what Hexet was saying in Brussels a few weeks ago, right? He was saying, guys, we stand by the alliance, but you need to understand that the geopolitical realities are such that we're going to have to focus primarily on the Indo-Pacific, and that means that, resources are scarce and so on. It means we're going to have to do less in Europe. I think this is an argument that the Americans have been saying for a while. They're saying it now in more explicit terms, and I think it's an argument that we Europeans should take seriously. I actually think that it's in the European interest that the United States bolsters its position in the Indo-Pacific as much as possible, because that is where the main challenge to U.S. power and to the entire geopolitical ecosystem that has formed around it, which includes the Euro-Atlantic structure, is coming from. So I think it's in our interest that the United States, it's in our collective interest that the United States strengthens its position in the Pacific region. I think the challenge now, in the coming weeks, days, weeks, and months and years, is to come up with a new sort of bargain that recognizes that we need to step up we Europeans need to step up in Europe so as to free up as much US bandwidth as possible so that the United States can concentrate, not fully, but primarily in the Indo-Pacific, which is what they want to do anyway, while still recognizing that we need US involvement, US engagement in Europe. Because it's critical in terms of political and military leadership and unity of action. I think there's a lot of what the US provides in Europe that we can replace by doing more, a lot of capabilities, a lot of assets that we can replace, but there are some things that are very difficult to replace and for which we still need the United States. So I think the challenge in the coming days and weeks and months is to have that more granular conversation through which we recognize that we need to facilitate indirectly the US's interest in rebalancing seriously, even radically, to the Indo-Pacific, while still recognizing that we still need US support and for the US to enable the European security architecture.
Okay, thank you. I guess it's a bit the notion of division of labor, but meaning Indo-Pacific and China is still an issue for Europe that I see as, and of course capabilities. I was reading today that the US already is talking about withdrawing from the Baltics, for example, withdrawing from as in part of NATO and other Western European countries. So we'll see. But moving on to you, Gabriele, and sort of trying to be constructive and, providing also solutions and suggestions. do you foresee, because you speak about a multipolar world, all these different sort of actors coming in, very volatile scenario, do you foresee an enlargement perhaps of sort of IP4, even if it's not a formal alliance as such, like we talk about NATO plus? Could you foresee as a solution, in a way, let's try and enlarge? I'm thinking of the Philippines, perhaps. India, I would argue, is far away. But Indonesia, other players in the region, perhaps? Is that, do you think, realistic or completely off? What do you think?
Well, what a question. Yes, we do live in times that require lateral thinking. This is a buzzword for everything and anything, but we need to think outside the box now, because what we relied upon may be there after this Trump administration or may not be there after the end of the Trump administration. Not as we knew it. So we need to take what's happening seriously for the first time, I think, because we Europeans have relied on Washington for a lot of time and for too long, perhaps. So as Louis was saying, we need to take what's happening quite seriously, which means that since new alliances as such are extremely rare and unlikely so far, perhaps we could take advantage of the second best option, which is alignments, which means minilaterals. There have been quite a lot of calls for a particular special security focus grouping of European countries that actually coalition of the willing, of those who wish to take European defense and their partners seriously. We could perhaps envisage something comparable, but tuned down in the Indo-Pacific. Especially in Southeast Asia, confrontational tones are best avoided. They didn't work in the past, and especially Asian countries, considering how close they are to China, how much they rely on Chinese money, they are understandably wary of confrontational approaches. But minilaterals, they offer the flexibility of discussing about defense, discussing about defense procurement, discussing about military exercises, which of course is something that we've been doing for quite a while. So enlargement of the IP4, why not? It's not that rooted as a grouping, and so it the flexibility that we need. But I would also look at the idea of Quad Plus, for example, and other regional groupings that could work in a way that guarantees cooperative security, but only to such an extent, because the Indo-Pacific is very different from the Euro-Atlantic. There's not just China, but there's the issue of Taiwan. There are so many regional differences that will take time to appease. So IP4 plus, maybe, Quad plus is already on the table for a few countries, but we need to talk about this right now. We cannot really wait that long anymore, I think.
Absolutely. Okay, let's open the floor. As far as I can see, we still have 10 minutes left. So please, whoever wants to ask a question, go ahead.
Supposing we go towards a divorce, do you think that the Europeans have some items during a divorce you use as much as you can to get the most out of the other party? So do we have any issues that can use in the Atlantic and in the Pacific? Thank you.
We get maybe a few more and then we can...
Non ho capito.
Good evening. I have a question for all the people that participated of this meeting, which is in the future and the most important content of the transatlantic relationship between the United States of America and the Union European after the two recent important event, as the meeting between the United States administration against
against Zelensky in Washington, D.C., and after the recent vote inside of the ONU Assembly, who the United States vote together entered Russia, North Korea, China, and Belarus, respect of the Ukrainian problem, crisis. Thank you.
Okay, one more, and then we can.
Good evening. Good afternoon. During these presentations, I haven't heard one single word about one important country in NATO, which is in the Pacific, which is Canada. What is the role that Canada is expected to play, considering that it is both on the Atlantic and on the Pacific, and considering the strategic capacity of Canada of supply, of whatever strategic supplies are concerned? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's let our speakers respond. Luis, I think you wanted to respond to the one on the Atlantic and the Pacific, so go ahead.
So I can take a crack at the first question. I mean, if I understood it correctly, you're asking if there's anything that Europeans can bring to the table when it comes to the possible Indo-Pacific contingency, right? I think my answer to that question would be yes. No doubt, yes. And I think it's a very good question. Very often in Brussels and in Europe, the discussion is, we're just too busy focused on Europe, and we don't have either the political will or the military capability to bring anything meaningful to the table if it comes down to a high-end fight in the Indo-Pacific. I do not think that is true. The political will question might be true, but you're asking about capability, right? You're not asking about the conditions and so on. I think right now, if you're thinking of a high-end fight between China and the United States over Taiwan or over some sort of first island chain contingency, it's in all likelihood, and there have been lots of games and TTX exercises on this, that it would spread very quickly, right? Horizontally, geographically, right? Into the Western Indian Ocean, into the Eastern Indian Ocean, into the Western Pacific, and so on. In all likelihood that the Chinese and the US navies, wherever they sort of find each other in this sort of broader theater of operations, they would be clashing, right? I think in that context, there are particularly also considering the state of development of China's so-called anti-access and area denial capabilities within the first island chain, which make it very difficult for any foreign power to access the theater. The most important, the most relevant capabilities from a military perspective would be stealth combat aircraft, but all of the bases available in the area are vulnerable to Chinese missiles, which means it is not that relevant. And then long-range fires, like particularly intercontinental range fires, and submarines. When it comes to submarines, which is probably the most important capability because you can get the closest to the fight, I think European capabilities today far outweigh the capabilities of any U.S. ally in the Indo-Pacific. So if you're talking of a sort of high-end scenario, and I'm talking only the military capabilities, not the politics, within the next 10 years or even 15 years, the capabilities that Europeans could, if they wanted, and if there's no other contingency in Europe, bring to the table could be strategically even meaningful. Particularly the British and French, because they have nuclear-powered submarines, which, as you know, are far more capable, but also other European countries like Italy, like Spain, like Sweden, and so on. So the answer would be yes.
Okay, thank you for that. Gabriele, you wanted to answer the second question, I believe. I know, Pietro, if you want to add something as well?
Well, that's a very interesting question, so thanks for making it. What's the future of relations between the United States and Europe, generally speaking, I think? Well, they don't have an answer to that. I can only think that the relation we used to have with the United States, which was somewhat convenient, let's be honest, is likely over. There may be hiccups in these new foreign policy shifts, and there will be because US politics changes, of course. But it's really time to wake up from what a great Australian scholar, Rory Metcalfe, called the European holiday from history. We took that holiday from history for a very good reason. Now it's time to wake up again and to remember that we have allies, but we also have partners, and both need cooperation with Europe. The capabilities, Louis was saying that the capabilities are, at least theoretically, mostly there, and that is true. If we take a look at national power indicators, the combination of European countries is extremely high. This is what's on paper, though. In reality, we lack, as we said before, we lack an integrated defense system that will take decades for Europe to develop. We lack, most of all, the political will. It's not really anyone's fault. The way that Europe and the European Union works and is geared is for different times. So we either update how the European Union works, which is very difficult, of course, because you need to put a lot of people on the table and everyone needs to say yes, or we rely on smaller groupings which are quicker, albeit less formal, which is possibly the path ahead for the leading European nations and some other willing to join the coalition of the willing. So on top of this, I don't have anything else to add at the moment. This is what we need to do. First of all, we need to realize that times are changing and we need to change as well.
Okay, Pietro, Councillor?
Yes, no, if I may further elaborate on that, obviously nobody's got the answer where the alliance is actually going, but what I can tell is that Italy is working for preventing division in the Western field. The division would be very detrimental to all of us and would definitely weaken us. So this is the main objective of the Italian government now. There is a new perspective, a new vision for politics coming from the other side of the Atlantic today. But some are facts. Trump has not arrived on January 20, 2025, but he arrived on January 20, 2017. And we all remember the call for increasing the spending. Basically, we are a certified free rider since 11 years at the Wales summit, because that is what when after Crimea we decided to step up the contribution. So a lot of time has passed, and now this is a fact. Obviously, I think there is a lot of tactical pressure also from the US. They have a very strong interest in several assets that they have in Europe, the replacement of which is not really foreseeable in the short run. So we have to work to keep them, together with us, to maintain the alliance. We already have been going through, the period in which some president called it as a brain dead. So now we have another challenge to revive the alliance and make it even stronger. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Pietro. Final remarks. If you want to add something about Canada also, that would be useful.
Maybe one point I think which is good to note. The good thing of institutions is that institutions, they bring stability. Sometimes they are slow to adapt, for sure, but the good thing also they bring stability. And this means that NATO as a political military alliance, of course, we prepare defense plans, but also we are a fora for discussion for our allies. And actually, that's what we wait for, the summit. And we see what will be the new consensus among the allies, because as you know, NATO is an organization which decides everything by consensus. So I think we have to discuss internally and see if any position will change at some point. For now, NATO's position as an alliance haven't changed regard to anything, because it requires a consensus among allies and with a concept, and we have a summit decision which are clear on all the points we mentioned before, including on Ukraine for sure. Regarding Canada, well, I don't know exactly how to respond to that point, but for sure, Canada is indeed also in the Pacific power. Actually, before joining NATO, I was posted for a while in Canada, and so I know well the country. It's a country which has extraordinary potential to contribute to the alliance, and I think not only because of that specific theater, but also for the Arctic theater, they have an exceptional capacity to bring value to the alliance, and it will be even more important in the months and years to come, for sure.
Okay, well, I think we have to stop here. Thank you, all of you, for this great discussion, very informative and very rich, and thank you all for listening. Well done.
Ma ancora c'è un po' di così, casino intermezzo. Buongiorno. Ehi! Sì. Se per favore prendete posto, comincia il
Taiwan again. Anytime. Okay, because I need to go to the bathroom. So we don't have to do anything, right? Just leave it like this. Okay. So very nice talking to you. Yes.
Dove sono gli altri? Arrivano? Va bene. No. Si perde il ritmo.
Thank you.
Caro, eccoti qua. Sì, signore. So, very well. So, good evening. We are starting the second panel. As you know, this panel is more centered on geoeconomics. And unfortunately, we have one person which couldn't make it from our Foreign Affairs Ministry, but we have, from my right,
Eccoci tornati in onda, siamo con Andrea Romussi, un diplomatico del Ministero degli Affari Esteri. Dunque le chiedo quindi quale può essere il ruolo dell'Italia nell'Indo-Pacifico, quali sono le strategie anche della Farnesina in questo campo. Ovviamente lei si occupa anche della Nato, lei segue la Nato per la Farnesina. Quindi ecco, questo connubio fra ruolo della Nato, che è sempre stata ovviamente più atlantica che pacifica, ma che adesso invece allarga sicuramente l'orizzonte verso est.
Sì, oggi è sempre più importante, nonostante si tratti di una alleanza politico-militare regionale, estendere la cooperazione nel settore della sicurezza anche con degli attori che si trovano appunto nell'Indo-Pacifico, segnatamente Giappone, Corea del Sud, Australia e Nuova Zelanda. Sono tutti paesi, democrazie mature che condividono i nostri stessi valori e che appunto hanno un interesse a collaborare con la Nato su una base essenzialmente paritaria. Non dobbiamo scordarci che tra i circa 50 partners che abbiamo, questi sono i paesi anche tecnologicamente più avanzati e per i quali quindi anche noi beneficiamo dello scambio di informazioni e pratiche migliori. Quindi pertanto c'è un legame tra la situazione di sicurezza nell'Indo-Pacifico e quella in europea, nell'Europa continentale. Abbiamo visto che c'è stata una crescente collaborazione tra la Russia e la Corea del Nord e quindi da fattore destabilizzante del Pacifico la Corea del Nord è diventato anche un critical enabler, un aiuto, un sostegno prezioso anche per la Russia nell'attacco all'Ucraina. Quindi questo è stato un ulteriore fattore di motivazione per accelerare questa collaborazione, ripeto, perché la sicurezza oggi ha comunque una dimensione globale.
Grazie. Allora so che la diretta è ricominciata di là, quindi ringraziamo Andrea Romussi e vi diamo appuntamento alle prossime interviste al termine del prossimo panel. Grazie.
Grazie a voi.
Innovation and strategic power plays, and it's critical that we harness these tools to reinforce sovereignty and foster collaboration. I would like to introduce 5 key points based on our most recent studies that I hope can serve as key takeaways for all of you. The first, AI and cybersecurity, strengthening digital infrastructure for sovereign security. So let's talk about cybersecurity, because already in 2025, it's been front and center. Last month, a major cyber attack targeted the Philippine government's defense networks, allegedly linked to state-sponsored actors. Similarly, Australia's critical infrastructure faced a sophisticated ransomware assault that disrupted essential services. Meanwhile, Japan's National Center of Incident Readiness and Strategy for Cybersecurity reported a significant rise in cyber attacks linked to foreign entities, as detailed in a Nikkei report from today. These incidents highlight how cyber threats are growing in scale and complexity, underscoring the urgent need for AI-driven cybersecurity solutions. AI-powered threat detection systems using machine learning and predictive analytics can help nations stay ahead of these attacks by identifying vulnerabilities before they are exploited. Second, AI in supply chain security and economic resilience amid strategic competition. In 2024, supply chain vulnerabilities were exposed yet again. The Taiwanese Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, announced in November 2024 that further restrictions on chip exports to China under U.S. pressure, escalating tensions and disrupting supply chains across the Indo-Pacific. Additionally, China doubled down on its rare earth mineral export limitations, affecting semiconductor production and AI hardware development worldwide. These disruptions make AI-driven logistics optimization and blockchain-based trade documentation more important than ever. AI-assisted risk assessment tools can help businesses and governments predict and navigate trade uncertainties, while automation can keep goods flowing even when geopolitical tensions disrupt traditional routes. The Trump presidency has immediately resulted in a more aggressive America First economic policy, further restricting trade with China and pressuring allies to follow suit. This could push Indo-Pacific nations to seek alternative trade frameworks, reinforcing intra-regional cooperation. Countries may increasingly adopt AI-driven trade facilitation to minimize dependence on the U.S.-China dynamic, leveraging technology to establish more resilient supply networks. Number 3, enhancing maritime security with emerging technologies. Maritime security is another critical issue, and 2024 saw heightened tensions in the South China Sea. In February 2024, a Philippine Coast Guard vessel was harassed by Chinese maritime militia, escalating concerns over sovereignty violations. Since 2022 and 2023, Japan and Australia ramped up their use of AI-powered satellite surveillance and autonomous drones to monitor illegal fishing and unauthorized incursions in their waters. AI-driven maritime domain awareness platforms are proving invaluable in these situations, allowing real-time tracking of potential threats and enhancing coordination between nations. Underwater autonomous vehicles, equipped with AI-driven anomaly detection, are helping secure critical naval routes and resources. With Trump in office again, we can expect shifts in U.S. defense commitments in the region, a potential recalibration of military alliances, particularly in how the U.S. supports the Philippines and Taiwan, may require Indo-Pacific nations to rely more on AI-enhanced defense technology rather than traditional military backing. Number 4, geopolitical competition and emerging technology alliances. Tech competition in the Indo-Pacific is heating up. In 2024, China ramped up investments in AI-driven surveillance infrastructure across Belt and Road Initiative partner nations, raising concerns about digital sovereignty. Meanwhile, the Quad Alliance, that's US, Japan, India, and Australia, have expanded its AI and cybersecurity initiatives to counter Chinese influence in the region. In 2021, the AUKUS deal, which continues to evolve with the UK and Australia focusing on AI-powered submarine technology. With the new Trump administration, we may see a more transactional approach to alliances, where nations are expected to shoulder greater responsibility for their security. This could accelerate AI research collaborations and autonomous defense projects in the Indo-Pacific as countries push for more technological self-sufficiency. And last but not least, number 5, climate security and AI-driven disaster preparedness. Climate change remains an existential threat, and 2024 has already demonstrated why AI-driven solutions are essential. In January, record-breaking typhoons battered Philippines and Taiwan, leading to widespread flooding and power outages. AI-powered climate models predicted the severity of these storms weeks in advance, allowing governments to issue early warnings and deploy response teams faster than ever before. Real-time AI-enhanced disaster monitoring, including IoT-driven sensor networks, is improving preparedness and resilience. AI-powered simulations can also predict migration patterns caused by climate-induced displacement, helping policymakers develop long-term strategies for affected communities. With the Trump administration reversing and/or ending various climate policies, Indo-Pacific nations need to take a more independent approach, leveraging AI and data-driven solutions to combat climate-related security threats without relying on global initiatives. In short, emerging technologies are not just tools, they are essential components of the Indo-Pacific sovereignty and security. From AI-driven cybersecurity to supply chain resilience, maritime monitoring, and climate adaptation, the region must take ownership of these advancements to stay ahead. with the return of Trump to the White House, Indo-Pacific nations will need to accelerate self-reliance in tech security and trade as the geopolitical landscape continues to shift. We feel that the partnership between ISEED and the Nato Defense College Foundation will become increasingly important from now on. Please look forward to our joint research and educational programs and events from now on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ken. As you see, there is a significant word coming up, self-reliance. I think it is very important in this quite complex environment to understand that whatever nation we might talk about, we have not been really, in a holiday from history. Surely not in Asia, and I can assure you not even in Europe. The problem is the balance between the different factors and the fact that being solely reliant on oneself is not a winning strategy. This is why cooperative security is important. If we try to solve our own problems all alone, and sometimes, this is a temptation. I've seen, for instance, our British friends doing something quite interesting, Well, the net gain is not really so impressive. So one can have one's own national policies, but then it's also important to mesh them up in the most, possible pragmatic way. Sometimes I would say even opportunistic, I dare say, in order to strengthen the individual capabilities, no matter who is the political actor. I would like now to pass the floor to my friend Vincent Tsai. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor. Good to be here. I have 8 minutes, but long speech. So just save the time, let me start my presentation. In recent years, Taiwan has maintained steady economic growth, despite global economic uncertainties. Taiwan GDP grew 4.3 last year, and we project to grow 3.4 this year. The key factor driving the expansion and can be attributed to Taiwan's deep integration into global supply chain, particularly in high-tech industry. And we fully recognize that staying aligned with global industrial trend is the only way to ensure Taiwan's economic competitiveness and global values. The topic of today's roundtable is particularly meaningful, especially when we are at the turning point in global technology development, where emerging technology will drive a new wave of economic growth, namely AI advancement and application. Reflecting today's topic of geoeconomics and cooperation on securing man's supply chain. In my presentation, I will test semiconductor and AI industry as example to brief you my government's policy and strategy in maintaining Taiwan's advantage in those two industries. First, let me quickly give you a short introduction about the status of the two industries in Taiwan. According to our calculation, Taiwan accounts for 50% of the global semiconductor market and more than 90% of the mid to high-end semiconductor market. Taiwan's semiconductor technology is becoming an indispensable element in supporting global technology development and global supply chain stability. Give you one example. In January 2024, an earthquake happened in southern Taiwan and briefly halted Taiwan Semiconductors company's production line, resulting in business losses of more than $100 million and affecting global supply and customers. Highlighting the extremely sensitivity of the semiconductor supply chain and Taiwan's
irreplaceable role within it. In light of AI, artificial intelligence is emerging as one of the common topics in the daily conversation in Taiwan. Without doubt, AI application will drive industrial transformation and create a new global AI supply chain. Over the next 5 to 10 years, I'm confident that AI industry will expand at an unprecedented scale. The Taiwan government also capitalized AI's explosive potential and is working with private industry to position Taiwan as an AI technology hub. Taiwan has an advantage in AI chip manufacturing and is a major global supplier of AI server and data center equipment. The frequent visit of the executive from many big technology giants, including NVIDIA, AMD, Microsoft, to Taiwan, highlighting that Taiwan's strong position in the global AI ecosystems. While Taiwan high-tech industry have achieved remarkable success, we remain highly vigilant and cautious in addressing future challenges, where ensuring supply chain security and resilience. Taiwan is facing an escalation of global threat uncertainty and is countering continuous political and economic pressure from China. Finding a sustainable path forward is a difficult and complex task. To solidify Taiwan's position in global supply chain, my government has adopted 3 core strategies to ensure supply chain security and resilience. The first is to strengthen Taiwan's industrial competitive edge. Taiwan has built a comprehensive industrial cluster with integrated upstream and downstream supply chain, improving efficiency and competitive edge. Additionally, talent development and infrastructure investment are essential to sustain industrial growth. In the semiconductor and AI industry, government policy, funding, talent, and infrastructure are the 4 key pillars of the development. Taiwan must rely on its own strength to build and refine this capability. My government is fully committed to this mission, providing strong support and stability for the industrial growth. Secondly, we are taking effort to diversify and de-risk the supply chain. Taiwan's economy has historically been overly dependent on a single market, which is China. In 2016, nearly 40% of Taiwan's exports were China-bound. The excessive reliance means that any economic downturn in China directly impacts Taiwan. We have since realized the risk of over-concentration and actively pursue export market diversification. In recent years, Taiwan has made bold breakthrough in expanding trading partnership with North America, Europe, ASEAN, and India. By 2024, Taiwan export to China has dropped significantly to 30%. But I personally believe this portion is still too high. In the near future, we expect to further reduce reliance on China while increasing trading with the other trading partners. Thirdly, we realize the importance and the taking effort to establish a comprehensive partnership globally. Taiwan has no time to feel complacent given the geopolitical challenge and obstacle facing it. we are now a member. We are now not a member of the United Nations, and we are faced constant threat from authoritarian China. Taiwan's biggest threat now is to defend against China's relentless threat and aggression. If you ask me whether Taiwan has ever made strategic mistake in dealing with China, I would say yes. We once believed that China's economic development will lead to internal political change. However, history has proved that helping China's economic growth only fuels its authoritarian ambition. China has escalated diplomatic suppression, military intimidation, and economic coercion against Taiwan. It has used import restriction, financial control, and industrial pressure to undermine Taiwan's economic independence. And to counter China's coercion, choosing the right economic partners is crucial. Today, I would like to share with you that my President Lai Ching-te has proposed the establishment of a non-red supply chain, which means fostering industrial cooperation with global democracy to ensure supply chain security and resilience. For instance, in semiconductors, Taiwan is spending investment in the United States, Japan, Germany, Italy, and India. In AI infrastructure, Taiwan is actively developing partnership with Mexico, the United States, India, Japan, and Asian nations. And the strategy not only benefits Taiwan's business, but also strengthens economic ties with global partners. And today in my closing, Taiwan's path to future development has been challenging, and the challenges ahead remain formidable. However, we firmly believe the maintaining an indispensable role in global supply chain is the only path to Taiwan's economic security and international standing. We will continue to propose economic diplomacy and technology diplomacy, deepen our partnership with all of you. Finally, I also would like to take this chance to emphasize that Taiwan has been to enhance cooperation with European countries. Our representative office across Europe serves as an ideal gateway for European business thinking partnership with Taiwan. So we welcome your inquiry and collaboration opportunity, and we will do our best to support and facilitate them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It is important to understand that besides, political regimes, there is a strong distinction between interdependence and autarky. And in my country, we had a serious experience of autarky, and it wasn't very useful. And this leads me, to consider the importance of keeping the fabric of economic globalization together, which is something that unfortunately came under considerable stress during these 3 years of war in Ukraine. In this sense, cooperative security allows to cooperate with anybody, and this is something that, of course, it's not always easy, but it's possible. It is already being done. And this allows to gain precious time, for whatever decisions then national governments would like to have. I would like now to pass the floor to our friend Paolo Guerrieri. As you see, we talk about geoeconomics, but they are no less sharp than geopolitics. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this
kind invitation to Ambassador Minuto-Rizzo, Nato College. I've been asked to talk about the future of global trade and the relation between Indo-Pacific country and Europe. Now, global trade is so important because, you know, it's the kind of network where global value change, foreign direct investment take place. In other words, trade is not anymore country exporting one product, finished product, to another country as, you know, decades ago, but trade today, 60–70% is taking place on this product that is from one place to the other and finally is assembled and exported. So is the kind of a pipeline of the globalization. Global trade today has two main risks. One is the fragmentation of the world economy that is underway, you know, at least over the past years. And the second one is the escalation of protectionist measure. That's what's going on before Trump, but certainly, you know, very recently, the U.S. administration, you know, contributed very much to this kind of protectionism that is some way, you know, is even very risky because using trade tariff and protectionist measure to advance strategic objectives that have little or nothing to do with trade. So, fragmentation and multipolar world is a fact because there are many countries that today intermediate country we call, but they are very important country because we are referring to, you know, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and these countries are more and more, you know, gaining the ability to influence the global kind of economy. Now, multipolarity on paper could be a very important kind of a step forward. The problem of multipolarity is the fact that, you know, under this fragmentation and protectionist trend could bring some kind of instability and even, you know, more risky, a kind of downsizing of trade flows. And this is not a future risk, but is something that is already taking place. The IMF, the World Bank, has provided very recently data showing that, you know, trade flows are resilient, of course, so this is a kind of remarkable performance, but trade is in some way much more performing, you know, within political blocks of country than, you know, across these trade blocks. So it means that, you know, although gradually trade flows are influenced by security and geopolitical factors, you know, and not only economic and efficiency factors. And FDI, the foreign direct investment, is following quite a similar path from this point of view. Why this risk is so important to highlight, you know, because the cost of fragmentation is, if it's not in some way managed, could be very high. This is another, you know, very recent evidence provided by the IMF, the World Bank. These costs are indeed very high for all countries, but particularly for developing and very poor countries. So, you know, the cost of fragmentation in some way could be the kind of deglobalization, and from this point of view is going to penalize FDI, global value chain, and so on. We are not there yet, fortunately, you know, because we are in a globalization phase. That is something different than, you know, a deglobalization, because in some way it's showing that still, you know, trade flows, first of all, are taking place under some global rule. This is not very much quoted, but 75% of trade flows are under existing rules. So, you know, it's not still a chaotic kind of world economy.
Secondly, is absolutely true, the threat of protectionism by Trump administration is indeed, a disrupting kind of force, but US is in some way managing around 15% of global trade. 85% is, under the a kind of control of all other countries. Of course, Europe, of course, Asia-Pacific, and Latin America, and so on. So the key question is it possible to do something in order to, manage and maintain a certain kind of stability of, world order regime? Some answer no. There is no, whatsoever possibility because the zero-sum game, is going to prevail. I don't think so. First, because the resilience of trade flows is showing that, still this kind of network is much more, resilient than usually assumed. And second, if it's true, if we are thinking about managing going back to the old style global governance of the past, this is not possible anymore. The global governance Bretton Woods style is over, and is over because the world of Bretton Woods doesn't exist anymore. That was the world economy between US and Europe. Two superpower, area were dominating 80% of the world economy. Today, we are in a multipolar world. So if we, in some way assume to do something in terms of governance, we should think something more, in some way flexible, more pragmatic, targeting plurilateral, kind of agreement among group of countries. And from this point of view, this kind of approach could be defined a kind of variable geometry of governance, of trade governance. Variable geometry means that we could in some way manage what is very risky in terms of behavior of country, but be much more tolerant in terms of some kind of approach. This is possible even under the rising protectionism that we are, this kind of variable geometry approach. And if you take European country and Indo-Pacific country, they are both very interested, should be very interested, in this kind of approach, because they both are very highly integrated in the world economy. Their growth and prosperity in the past strongly been based on trade, FDI, global value chain. So from this point of view, we could in some way make this hypothesis that could be a kind of, agreement, or at least an interaction among this group of countries in this direction. Not thinking about a new global table, but, much more kind of targeted agreement. And this is very important because, for example, in terms of Europe, this is a kind of area where Europe is a unitary actor, because trade, regime is under the control of the Commission, and the Commission is only entitled to, manage this kind of agreement. Of course, the interest of Europe today is, of course, to have a kind of transactional approach to the US administration, but this kind of, enlarging the network, the kind of agreement in terms of variable geometry is very much, a second important pillar of a trade policy strategy of the EU. And I think, and I conclude with this kind of, statement, I think economic and security are becoming two interacting kind of trends. So it's very important to think about, this idea about the economic area, but it's also very important to think about, a kind of parallel step in terms of security, because it's very clear that the two are not anymore two separated fields, but they two are, in some way highly reinforcing each other, or vice versa, making major obstacle. So I think this is a very interesting kind of meeting, because I think this is the right time in order to talk about this possibility, particularly in terms of this two group of countries that we were referring. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paolo, because really this is not a return of history, what you are sketching, especially with your final words. It is the normality of history. Strategic and economic security were always in a dialogue. For a certain period of time, we had that sort of apparent divorce. Now, the problem is, and this is something, a risk that I see, is that sometimes people come up with ideas to fight a confrontation with old ideas, instruments, and goals. And the idea of tariffs strikes me, because I've seen the same thing happening with Germany. It was a very technologically advanced country in the 30s and 40s. But the main goal was the conquest of fertile fields in Eastern Europe, which is totally anachronistic. So I think that we have really to pay attention to these time warps in which sometimes elites do dwell, even unconsciously. Tariffs is as old as Colbert. It can be effective, but the world is much more complex at the time of the Ancien Régime. I would like now to put, to the three speakers some short question and answer before opening the floor. And to Ambassador Tsai, I would like to ask if, Taiwan is studying scenarios on the effect, of the developments of US and PRC's economies, taking into account also the US debt bubble, because this is something that seems to be very present in the defense and overall cuts of the Washington government. As you know, despite the 5%, this administration is advocating a defense spending cut of 40% in 5 years, which is extraordinary. It seems a peace dividend, Ambassador, please.
I'm
sorry? Yes, I'm saying if your government is already considering a number of economic scenarios between the US and the Chinese economy, how they impact on, your global semiconductor and AI chains.
Okay, actually, I already understand the question in the beginning, but I don't know how to answer that. That's why I come back and ask you again. I want to buy more time to think how to respond that questions. First, we fully understand there are many talks regarding about the security of Taiwan's semiconductor industries. And somebody say we put too much efforts to work together with specific countries. But I would like to emphasize that. First, diversify the investment of the Taiwan's semiconductor industry is the only principle for my government. We try to hold the core technology.
Bentornati, siamo con il professor Gabriele Abbondanza, è un esperto di relazioni internazionali, di geopolitica, e siamo sempre sul tema ovviamente dell'Indo-Pacifico. Dunque io chiedo al professor Abbondanza come sta cambiando la regione Indo-Pacifica di fronte alle sfide ovviamente della Cina, che è il grande attore in quella regione che crea instabilità, ma anche ovviamente con quello che sta succedendo negli Stati Uniti. C'è dalla parte europea, noi abbiamo visto questo weekend cosa è successo tra i paesi europei più il Regno Unito, che di fronte a comunque il nuovo atteggiamento degli Stati Uniti dicono dobbiamo costruire una nostra sicurezza e rafforzare la sicurezza europea. Succede lo stesso anche in quel quadrante. Ovviamente noi abbiamo dei paesi come la Corea del Sud, l'Australia, il Giappone, che sono dei paesi, la Nuova Zelanda, che sono dei paesi che in quella regione hanno ovviamente degli interessi simili a quelli della Nato. Oggi siamo qui a parlare con la Nato Defense College Foundation, ma che ovviamente forse anche loro in questo momento stanno iniziando a rendersi conto che hanno bisogno di rafforzare una sicurezza regionale, qualunque sia lo scenario internazionale.
Sì, viviamo oggi in un contesto in cui l'Indo-Pacifico non è soltanto il fulcro geoeconomico del mondo, 2/3 del commercio marittimo mondiale, 2/3 della popolazione, 2/3 del PIL mondiale, ma è anche il fulcro geopolitico, per tutti i motivi che abbiamo già elencato. Quindi da un lato vi è interesse a cooperare di più, perché chiaramente vi sono opportunità economiche, politiche e culturali, dall'altro dobbiamo tutti quanti capire, soprattutto noi europei, che il nostro stile di vita, il nostro commercio internazionale, le nostre partnership internazionali sono a rischio proprio per l'aspetto geopolitico di questa grande macro regione. È chiaro che noi europei, soprattutto nel contesto molto instabile all'interno della coalizione euroatlantica di questa fase, dobbiamo fare di più. Questo è chiaro da molti anni, dobbiamo fare meglio e dobbiamo farlo in fretta. Questo non vuol dire che dobbiamo farlo da soli. Spendere di più, spendere meglio, lavorare meglio va bene e va assolutamente fatto nel contesto europeo, ma deve essere fatto anche e sempre in collaborazione con l'alleato statunitense, se egli vuole e può, questo giustamente dipende dalla fase politica di un particolare momento, e con i partner dell'Indo-Pacifico. L'Europa e anche l'Italia ha molte relazioni importanti attraverso tutti i più importanti settori delle relazioni internazionali. Dobbiamo rafforzarli perché questa è l'unica via per rafforzare la cooperazione nell'ambito della sicurezza di tutti noi.
Ecco, è una cosa alla quale non eravamo molto abituati, insomma è una cosa più recente vedere l'Italia e la Germania presenti anche con forze navali nell'Indo-Pacifico. Ovviamente in Europa c'è una potenza indo-pacifica, è la Francia che ha dei territori nella regione, ma gli altri paesi, anche la Spagna se pensiamo, insomma ci sono altri paesi NATO che però hanno finora guardato molto al vicinato del Mediterraneo, se parliamo dei paesi come appunto Spagna, Italia e Francia, e ovviamente a est se guardiamo ai paesi dell'ex blocco sovietico e anche ovviamente la Germania, eccetera. Ma adesso diciamo l'Europa riesce a giocare un ruolo effettivamente nell'Indo-Pacifico, e soprattutto c'è un coordinamento in questa proiezione dell'Indo-Pacifico, oppure in questo momento ancora i paesi vanno un po' ognuno per conto suo?
Ecco, questa è un'altra domanda da $1 milione. L'Europa è nell'Indo-Pacifico anche con le navi, oltre che con i politici, con i diplomatici, con gli esperti di commercio, inizialmente perché gli Stati Uniti ce l'hanno chiesto. Il che sembra paradossale visto il momento storico in cui stiamo vivendo. Questo ad esclusione ovviamente di Francia e Regno Unito, che hanno motivi ben più pragmatici per essere lì da molti anni prima di noi. In realtà però l'Europa ha tutto un interesse trasversale ad essere nell'Indo-Pacifico. Le due regioni rappresentano una interconnessione di valori, di cultura, di economia, di diritto internazionale che è diventata imprescindibile. Non possiamo più fare a meno dell'Indo-Pacifico, non nel XXI secolo. Quindi tanto vale essere lì cooperando con i nostri partner dell'Indo-Pacifico. Non dimentichiamoci che abbiamo partnership strategiche con la maggior parte degli attori più importanti di quella regione, non solo l'Unione Europea ma anche l'Italia stessa. Ecco, quindi per rispondere alla domanda sull'eventuale coordinamento europeo, in questo momento ancora non c'è. Si deve sviluppare e questo è uno dei motivi per cui siamo qui oggi al Collegio della Difesa della Nato.
Grazie mille a Gabriele Abbondanza e diamo di nuovo la linea alla diretta.
Anti-China race or efforts in AI has always been bipartisan. And people were wondering, well, what's going to happen with Trump? But from what we can see now, that Trump is actually making even the current administration is making even more efforts to kind of slow down and to undermine China in their development of AI. So that has not changed, it will not change. And so it's going to be then a continuing race of domination between the US and China.
Thank you very much, Ken. These are, quite sobering words. We were a bit obsessed with Ukraine, but if we tend to forget the light cavalry, of software and AI development, we tend to then not to see the hard security risks that are on the heel. If you have that sort of, existential race, it starts virtual and it can become very, very, very physical. And it's interesting because the other perspective on international trade is around, a multipolar world. So you are going from a Holy Roman Empire to a Westphalia Treaty, which is still not in the cards. And so from, Italian to Italian, I put you a very Italian question, What sort of multipolarisms do you see? There is a slow globalization. There is a quite corralled beginning of, global trade within specific, fenced areas. But, they could be different developments, and they are quite open.
Yeah, I mean, if we have one day, I could give you an answer. But just to be short, the main trend is not only multipolarization, but fragmentation. Fragmentation means that we are not going back to the flat world we were referring to in the globalization age, the flat world where the only problem was where it was more economic convenient to invest. But the flat world is over. Fragmentation is a fact, and fragmentation is not going to diminishing, but is going to consolidate. Fragmentation means, different interconnected kind of flows of trade, FDI, among a group of countries. But fragmentation and that is a kind of multipolarization, could have two different scenarios. So this is just to answer your question. The first one is a kind of chaotic fragmentation. In other words, no way of managing this kind of relation among this group of countries. Very much the initiative is taking place by this intermediate country. They are pursuing their own interests in terms of like India, like Turkey, and China and the US have no power to, in some way, regroup this country into one side or the other. So the two-block world economy, I think, is the most unlikely scenario that we could have about fragmentation. So one scenario is a chaotic fragmentation, and that's, of course, is very negative both for European countries that need a space economy that is not stable, but is not chaotic, and is very negative for the Indo-Pacific country. The second scenario is still fragmentation, but a sort of kind of what I call flexible governance, the possibility of plural kind of agreement among a group of countries into issue area that are in some way, in the interest of this group of countries. So the possibility of mitigating the effect of fragmentation. And in this, second scenario, the role of Europe, the potential role of Europe, and the potential role, of Indo-Pacific country is indeed very relevant, because we cannot expect neither from China, neither from the US, the kind of big push, because they are very interested about, in some way constructing their sphere of influence, around the world. So the role could be for European countries very high, but
be very clearly, not for European country per se, for Europe as a unitary actor, for European Union as a unitary actor. Because it's very clear that, if we are going to divide and, we are going to try to find Italy, Germany, for our own kind of agreement, this is going to be, a totally marginalization of our area. So I think these are the two scenarios, very rough and summing up, but fragmentation, chaotic fragmentation, managed in a flexible and variable geometry way.
Thank you very much. It seems there's a choice between the dark Middle Age and the Renaissance of Lorenzo de' Medici, but it's something which is possible. I would like now to open the floor to the public, because you see that we have Ambassador. You want to? Yes, there is a microphone, please. There. Thank you.
Well, as I am also in part responsible for this conversation, I found the discussion very interesting. Of course, perhaps a little bit difficult for people who are not familiar with economics to follow, but very important because very political in the end. But coming back to something simpler, if you like. My question, this is a session about the Indo-Pacific in the end, and Paolo, you made us a good lesson about where the world is going. That's good, of course, and I share what you say. But cannot the Indo-Pacific region, with the largest part of the world, be a factor of growth, of wealth, of some hope? Because we are speaking, and rightly so, about fragmentation, about China, the United States, interested in enlarging their own sphere of influence. Okay, we understand that. But, basically, there are billions of people living in the Indo-Pacific. Cannot they, change something?
Yeah. Go on, yes, please.
I think not only could be, is today one, area that is so important for global growth. If you take the last 2 years, Indo-Pacific was contributing, together with China, of course, but it was contributing to 2/3 of the rate of growth at a global level. Indo-Pacific, again, if you take China together, is today the most important manufacturing platform in the world. Because global value chain is the way how manufacturing products are produced today. There is no product that is not in some way manufactured by a global value chain. And global value chain, Indo-Pacific is becoming in a very short period of time, because we are talking about less than 30 years. 30 years historically is nothing. In 30 years, from almost no relevance, Indo-Pacific area, became the most important dynamic manufacturing area, in the globe. And what is also very important, they are strongly, pushing toward not protectionism, but, making a free economic space as much alive as possible. They made the two most important kind of free trade agreement, in the last 5 years. The CTPP, now this kind of Adnkronos are very difficult. But, this is the area where recently we had the most important free trade area agreement, in the past 5 years. So I totally agree with you. We should take so seriously this area, because not only in the future, but today is such an important partner. And of course, Europe, but I will say also Italy, is taking probably because Europe has been able to establish very important trade agreement with, individual country in the Pacific, Indo-Pacific area, with Japan, with South Korea, with the only step that I see very important is today European Union could deal a kind of, as an area, kind of agreement, for example, with the grouping of countries in this area. So instead of bilateral kind of relation, we could think about this kind of groupings that are very much related to what I was referring to, plurilateral, kind of agreement. That is today the only feasible kind of area that if you want to, mitigate the cost of fragmentation. So not so much a renaissance, but something that is avoid the dark age of middle age.
Okay, I think we have just, 8 minutes, so there is at least one question I see there. You're ready? So short question, short answer. Probably we can squeeze another one, but let's see.
Hi, my question is to Ambassador Tsai. First, thank you for your remarks. They were very eye-opening to get a view from an Indo-Pacific country over these issues. My question is on how Taipei and Your Excellency is viewing the signals of the Trump administration in these sectors critical to economic security. For instance, we have Trump threatening tariffs on the semiconductor industry, to encourage TSMC, for instance, and other key Taiwanese stakeholders to de-risk from China and increase investment in the US. At the same time, we have export controls on the horizon from the US and diplomatic language that is reflecting some of the Taiwanese government's views on the one China policy and such. So how do you and your government make sense of these signals? Is the transactional approach something that you can work with, or is it a cause for concern?
Short question and short answer. I don't know how to make the short answer. Okay, anyway. The question you propose is also a very common issue discussed in Taipei right now. First, we would like to have a consultation with all the trading partners, including the United States, to make sure we all get the clear picture from the both sides. And secondly, I still want to emphasize that first, we would like to hold the core value of the industry on the island. And we also would like to expand our partnership with the other diplomatic countries. And for example, if you talk about the semiconductor, once we control and manage the core technology of semiconductor technology in Taiwan, then we don't have to be fear somebody going to put some trading the measures against Taiwan, because that product is only can produce from the island. And we will do that kind of evaluation to make sure national security we need. Of course, we would like to expand cooperation and partnership, but we also would like to emphasize that we have the most important part to be stay on the island.
Very well, thank you very much. We are in time because there are now the final remarks of Ambassador Cowley, and so I invite you to thank the panel, and we switch over. Thank you very much. We stay.
Well, thank you very much. And particularly thank you to Ambassador Minuto-Rizzo for the invitation to speak tonight. It's been a pleasure to hear such wide-ranging discussions. As a diplomat, I can assure you there's nothing more that we like than wide-ranging discussions, and it's been very interesting this evening. Australia and NATO partnership is long-standing, and it's founded on our shared commitment to upholding the international rules, norms and standards that promote stability, peace and prosperity. And we are very proud to have been the first partner to participate in a NATO exercise. That goes all the way back to 1953. So as the panel said tonight, it's not that NATO is expanding in the region, there's always been a long history. And our cooperation has only grown in importance since the decades since. To borrow from my Foreign Minister, the Honourable Penny Wong's description, we are now living in a more dangerous and turbulent world. More people are displaced, more people are hungry. The climate is changing faster than our combined efforts to stop it. There is a greater risk of nuclear warfare, and conflict rages from Sudan to Myanmar, from Yemen to Gaza, and of course, as we've heard and spoken about tonight, Russia's illegal and immoral invasion in Ukraine, which continues more than 3 years on. Today, as the panels have emphasised, it's more evident than ever before that the concept of separate theatres does not exist. And it's in this context that Australia has committed $1.5 billion in assistance to Ukraine. Australia stands with Ukraine. So, while we may be oceans apart, the IP4 partnership between Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea and NATO helps us share perspectives at a time where we do ourselves a disservice if we see the world in silos. And it provides us with the ability to engage individually and as a group to address the issues of the day. Each partner has a unique perspective and approach to ensuring the security and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region. With heightened geostrategic competition, it's often the case that the conversation can be oversimplified and to focus on the pursuits of large global actors. But to do so, we overlook the thousands of kilometres that surround us, and it's the entirety of the Indo-Pacific that is important to us. For Australia, the topics that we've talked about tonight, soft power, economic security, supply chains, this resonates with our approach and our vision for a peaceful, stable, prosperous Indo-Pacific. These are invaluable aspects of a peaceful global order. So today, if I may, I'd like to share some perspectives, particularly on how we engage in the Pacific. For the last 2 years, I've worked on the Pacific, and including on a focus on soft security and why this is so important. And I'm hoping that these reflections add to the conversations we've been having. Firstly, the importance of regional architecture. As you've heard, our region is now in a permanent state of contest. In these challenging times, more than ever, we need to count on each other, because it's only by harnessing this collective strength and sovereignty that we ensure that no one country dominates. So, it's no surprise that Australia supports a strong and effective regional architecture, where all countries can contribute to a regional balance of power. As a democratic independent nations, we're best served by Pacific-led institutions and processes, rather than anything else imposed from outside the region. And that's why the Pacific Island Forums is at the heart of our collective power, and it's a critical force multiplier. I recently met with Under-Secretary the Honourable Giorgio Silli, who attended the Pacific Island Forum in 2023, and he as well saw firsthand the importance of this PIF grouping. As Italy pursues a renewed engagement and commitment in strengthening the presence in the Indo-Pacific, we encourage Italy and broader Europe to take the approach Australia has, which is to listen and to learn from Pacific leadership. We've listened to Pacific priorities, we listen to Pacific voices, and we learn about the Pacific way. For over 50 years, the Forum has led us in this Pacific way. And the PIF is home to key blueprint documents: the 2050 Strategy for the Blue Pacific Continent, the Boy Declaration on Regional Security, the Bikitawa Declaration. These are the documents that frame the way that the Pacific family engages on the world stage to find solutions to these challenges that we face. Now, the biggest security challenge of all, and it was mentioned briefly by Ken, I noted today, is climate change. It's the single greatest threat to livelihoods, to to safety, to security, and to the well-being in the Pacific. We cannot afford to dismiss its importance. The Pacific nations experience the effect of climate change as the front line, and they contribute the least to it. Last year, I spent time with the Honourable Maina Taylor, who is the Climate Change Minister of Tuvalu, and to hear him speak personally about what climate change is in Tuvalu, listening to his words is incredibly sobering. But I also need to speak to the resilience as well. He told me that in the face of this existential threat, they'll continue to dance their traditional dance, the Fratelli. So it's in this reality that we know we have a responsibility to reduce emissions and advocate that others, including the world's largest emitters, do the same. Economic integration is, of course, another key issue, and we heard about that this afternoon as well. A resilient, connected region enables all our economies to grow and prosper. This is providing a critical incentive for peace as regional economies share the benefits of prosperity. So this is why Australia's been investing in infrastructure, highways, seaports, airports, aviation links. Our partnership with Palau, we have a direct flight from Brisbane to Koror. It's around families being connected, communities being connected, and businesses staying connected. We also have Australian North Pacific flight, which is, again, growing tourism and providing regular links to Australia. I've been impressed by the pace of undersea telecommunication cables, and again, this was mentioned by the last panel, critical for connectivity, for access to global information, banking, shopping, education, everything we need in our modern lives. And I'd note that the announcement of the last telecommunication undersea cable in December last year was a project between Australia, US, Japan, New Zealand and Taiwan. So it is these partners coming together to work in the Pacific that's incredibly important. Australian and Pacific Defence and Police forces work together and keep peace in the region. Again, under the Boy Declaration, we have a maritime security program, which is a 30-year commitment supporting Pacific-led cooperation and information sharing. We are building the region's capacity to protect exclusive economic zones and economic sovereignty. We also promote women's voices in the security leadership by supporting defence operations in line with our National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. And I would really encourage the Defence College to continue to ensure women's voices are heard in incredibly important discussions as well. In policing, we back local Pacific-led policing. It's developed by the Pacific and for the Pacific. And we are now trying to tackle the shared challenges of corruption, maritime security and cybercrime. We recognise the unique challenges of smaller island nations. I want to point out that when we talk about the Pacific, it's very much not one homogenous region. We have countries like Niue, who have under 2,000 people in their population, to PNG, who have over 10 million people. So the needs are different for every island state. And Australia's been working in unique treaties to respond to this. So with Tuvalu, we have the Felipelli Union. With Nauru, we have a new Australian treaty. For Nauru, it's very important that Australia provide banking services. So we're thrilled that the Commonwealth Bank of Australia is providing ongoing access to banking services, again, providing a safer and secure region. The security and stability rests not only in the strength of traditional security sectors, and I hope that's what you understand from my comments. I'll wrap up quickly, but I guess I wanted to provide a sense of the breadth of the areas that we are working together to collaborate on. Each of these areas is so important for the stability and prosperity of our region. We are working to celebrate the connections in the Pacific, whether it's our common connections in sport, personal links, faith, and we talk about the shared cultural bonds and histories that will forever link our people together. We're supporting PNG to join Australia's National Rugby League competition. We're supporting the Pacific in the lead up to the Brisbane Olympic Games. We are working in many different ways across our region. All of this cooperation ties us closer together. I've focused my comments on the Pacific, as I said, and outlining just a few of the many ways we work together. But we have similar commitment to working within the regional architecture of ASEAN, and we partner with the nations across the Indo-Pacific in bespoke ways. All of these efforts by Australia add up to promoting a region to benefit us all. So when I come back to our engagement with NATO on maritime security, climate change and resilience, this is what's important to our partners. We talked about IP4, the strength in that grouping is in our common values with NATO allies in supporting peace, security, human rights and the rule of law. A stronger, united, prosperous Indo-Pacific is the greatest deterrence to aggressors. We want any aggressor to know that conflict is not worth the risk. For those who want more information on the way that we work, I'd recommend a new publication, Australia in the World. It's our 2025 snapshot and it goes into a lot more detail than I can tonight. But again, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to make these remarks. I pay absolute tribute to the Nato Defense College for committing to these important conversations and particularly on highlighting the importance of the Indo-Pacific region to all your work here. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think it was the ideal conclusion of our afternoon. Thank you very much, because we spoke about diplomacy, NATO, economics, tough issues, but you gave us some kind of direction for the future, which is not a negative one, which is a very good thing in these days. So thank you very much. I think we are at the end of our meeting. I thank everybody. Because it has been a difficult decision for us, to have this event this afternoon in 2 hours and a half with 2 different panels. It's a bet on, about what the public likes, because, we work for you, in fact, in the end, We are not brought to have a conference for ourselves, So from judging from you, from what I see, I take it that is not so bad in the end, which is, for us, an important information. So, after having said that, and thank you for your remarks, all of you, and Alessandro, and the staff of my foundation, young girls and boys, who work on a scholarship basis and are here for the first time. So, we have to give an applause to them, I think. Grazie a tutti, buonasera.
So, I'm really happy about your contribution.
So we're now back with Amaya Sanchez-Casicedo. Welcome. So I'm going to ask you some final takeaways from the event of today.
Well, I would argue that NATO must engage in the Indo-Pacific, as it is doing already. It is, however, at a critical juncture, whereby it's facing challenges at the level of its Chinese presence, currently Euro-Atlantic rift, and an issue of capabilities. Yet, with a view to the future, the only way forward, I would argue, is engaging with the partners it's already engaging with and perhaps even enlarging these.
Okay, so you see, this process going forward, actually, not retreating, because, probably what is happening right now in the transatlantic relationship is actually giving strength to the necessity of creating also regional alliances and the alliance of Europe with Indo-Pacific countries.
Well, absolutely. I think, as was said today, none of what's happening is yet happening at an institutional level, so that will take a while to begin with. There has to be consensus within NATO for anything to happen. 2, I would imagine that NATO partners could move forward even if there's a sort of retraction from the US, which may want to use other means, but so are other partners within NATO doing. So I think there are parallel ways to move forward, and there's other types of engagement as we're seeing. There's the Quad, there's the AUKUS, the Squad, there's all kinds of other unilaterals happening.
Ok, thank you very much. Grazie per chi ci ha seguito oggi dalla Nato Defense College Foundation. Questo incontro sull'Indo-Pacifico ha coinvolto molti attori internazionali, attori italiani, europei, australiani, taiwanesi, insomma abbiamo sentito molte voci della regione, abbiamo sentito molte voci sia accademiche che operative, hanno parlato ambasciatori, hanno parlato diplomatici, esperti della regione, e quindi diciamo il percorso per un rafforzamento dei rapporti fra Italia e Indo-Pacifico è iniziato, e mi pare che sia abbastanza su una strada senza ritorno, nel senso che è una strategia che il nostro governo e anche più ampiamente l'Unione Europea hanno intrapreso, e quindi il futuro sarà sempre più Indo-Pacifico anche per noi, ovviamente sempre chiari e fermi interessi italiani nel Mediterraneo e nelle regioni che ci circondano, ma la necessità di allargare lo sguardo oltre l'orizzonte e verso Asia è assolutamente un dato di fatto. Grazie per chi ci ha seguito oggi, e vi diamo appuntamento alle prossime dirette di Adnkronos.